Welcome to a Legendarium special about Mentuhotep II, the Pharaoh who restored Egypt. In this episode, we will talk about the collapse of the Old Dynasty, a period of anarchy and feuding warlords that followed, and how one man, through an iron will, restored Egypt to greatness. The Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt ended with the 6th dynasty, for no king emerged to lead the nation. Instead, local power brokers called nomarchs took care of their communities, and Egypt tumbled into an era of lawlessness now called the First Intermediate Period. Some of the ancients called this time the era of 70 kings in 70 days. In truth, warlords fought over Egypt like jackals struggling over a carcass. We know much about one such warlord named Antibi, who dominated a stretch of the Nile River Valley in the south. After rising through the ranks of the civil service, he became a regional governor for the fading 6th dynasty. As the power vacuum opened up, he eagerly filled it. In a time of drought and famine, he managed scarce resources by giving food to those who needed it badly and those willing to serve him. Antibi became admired for his acts of charity. He was said to provide sandals to the barefoot and women to bachelors. The former civil servant became a warlord as well, fighting bloody struggles against rival nomarchs to take what they possessed and give them to those who followed him. He built a rock-cut tomb in Malala, far from the usual and beloved tourist sites, in a formation that resembled a pyramid, not a coincidence. Within its walls, his servants carved a grave for him into the stone and built columns to hold up the rock ceiling. Upon the columns, scribes engraved hieroglyphics that described his rise to glory. A painting depicted a giant Antibi on the wall with the name of King Netjarkare crushed under his foot. In this early propaganda, Antibi declared, "I am the beginning and the end of mankind, since nobody like myself existed before, nor will he exist after me." Yet many such warlords existed during what men later called the First Intermediate Period. In time, these feuding nomarchs, either through agreement or conquest, consolidated into 2 rival dynasties. In the north, a line of warlord kings based in Heracleopolis wore the red crown of Lower Egypt. 4 dynasties passed in the shadowy and little-known years that followed. While the northern kings became known as the 11th dynasty, a dynasty ruling Upper Egypt from Thebes wore the white crown and would become known as the 12th dynasty. Between the 2 sides lay a war zone, with Egypt's most ancient and sacred site, Abydos, in its center, the resting place of Egypt's first kings, whose mummified corpses remained in their stone mastabas for more than 1,500 years, remained undisturbed even as the warlords fought around them. Yet, during one of these wars, the northern kings ordered their soldiers to burn the interior of these tombs, for southern kings lay inside them. This severed Egypt's link to its glorious past. This grotesque blasphemy rightly appalled the people of northern and southern Egypt. Although the northern kings later deplored the crime of their soldiers, what became known as the vile deed still hung over their crowned heads. Small wonder that scribes of the time wrote, "See now that things are done that never were done before. The king has been robbed by beggars. See him buried as a hawk is. What the pyramid hid is empty. See now, the land is deprived of kingship by a few people who ignore custom." Today, only thousands upon thousands of broken pots remain in the tombs of Abydos, for during the generations that followed the vile deed, worshippers came with pots filled with grain, beer, and incense, which they offered to the immortal spirits of the offended ancient kings with songs. By doing so, they believed they could make amends for the heinous crime committed by their countrymen. Of course, others sought atonement by washing away sin with sinners' blood. By doing so, they would also, coincidentally, make themselves king of a reunited Egypt. In 2100 BC, the warlord kings of Thebes held their seat on the Kenner Bend of the Nile, a center of rich farmland, and they worshipped Mentu, the god of war. These two advantages gave them a decisive advantage in the final phase of the First Intermediate Period. Several successful warlord kings based in Thebes slowly gave the city an unassailable position. Mentuhotep I, who lived around 2115 BC, conquered the surrounding nomarchs for Thebes, which greatly increased the city's power. Wanakh-Intef II, who ruled around 2063 BC, is credited with taking the sacred city of Abydos, which appeared to give the god's blessing to Thebes. Wanakh-Intef II further strengthened Thebes' position by ruling justly and commanding successful expeditions against the northern stronghold of Heracleopolis, which weakened the northern dynasty's hold on the Nile Delta. Finally, a fourth Theban warlord named Mentuhotep II, whose name means the war god Mentu is content, finished the work of his fathers. During the 14th year of his reign, Mentuhotep II launched a drive against Heracleopolis. Nothing is known of the war, but the Thebans benefited from a sudden change of rulers in the enemy capital, perhaps caused by infighting. By 1968 BC, Mentuhotep II captured Heracleopolis and reunited Egypt under his rule. However, his warriors paid a heavy price in blood and tears for their king's glory. At a mass grave discovered in Deir el-Bakri during the year 1923, west of Thebes, archaeologists discovered the skeletal remains of 60 soldiers who served Mentuhotep II. The hot, dry climate preserved these men, their skin, and their hair. Some bodies had ebony-tipped arrowheads still in their bodies. Others wore leather wrist guards favored by archers to protect their arms against bowstrings. One man suffered a massive crater in his skull after being struck by a flint mace. Before being buried, the vultures picked over their bodies. Yet Mentuhotep II ordered his fallen heroes wrapped in linen and buried alongside his highest officials, creating the world's first known war cemetery. During the following years, fighting continued in the north against the Bedouin, who raided the Nile Delta whenever they sensed Egyptian weakness. Later in his reign, King Mentuhotep II extended his kingdom into northern Nubia, which lay to the south. To consolidate the unification of Egypt, Mentuhotep received the submission of the northern nomarchs, most of whom he left in office to ease the process of reunification. By doing so, Mentuhotep II created a network of powerful provincial families. Nonetheless, these families continued to hold great influence, and it allowed for upward mobility unthinkable in the Old Kingdom. Yet Thebes, Mentuhotep's stronghold, became the national capital, and Mentuhotep's loyal supporters received the most important jobs. However, he also accepted the partisans of defeated Heracleopolis, provided they showed themselves enthusiastic to the new order. People came to call Thebes the city of 1,000 gates, and it became home to the temples of Karnak and Luxor. Mentuhotep II built temples at numerous Upper Egyptian sites, but little survive of them to this day. At Thebes, he built a magnificent tomb complex for himself at Deir el-Bakri on the west bank of the Nile. It contained the first known depictions of Amun-Ra, dynastic god of the Middle Kingdom. The hills around the monument became honeycombed with the tombs of high officials and soldiers. These buildings influenced architects for centuries. Mentuhotep II also used the ancient mastaba design, which included a larger-than-life statue of himself garbed in the robe used for his Hepsed festival to celebrate 30 years on the throne. Another statue depicted his wife having her hair eternally arranged by a servant, and yet another artifact showed his daughter enjoying the fragrance of a lotus blossom. These scenes reveled in the peace and prosperity which Mentuhotep II finally restored to Egypt. And more than 6 centuries later, Queen Hatshepsut built her own tomb nearby in the hopes of benefiting from the awesome power of a man known as the second Narmer. He died around 1957 BC, leaving a reunited and prosperous kingdom to his successor, Saqqara Mentuhotep III, who would become the second king of Egypt's Middle Kingdom. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.